This week, Martin Roesch from Netography is with us to discuss atomized networks. Then Edward Wu from ExtraHop joins us to talk about an MRI for the cloud. Finally, in the enterprise security news, funding in cyber is still healthy, though we don't have many funding announcements this week. Tetris raises 44 million euros to fight cyber threats. Vanta raises 40 million to automate compliance tasks. Another password manager enters the Thunderdome. Another attack simulation vendor, though in this category, the more the merrier as far as I'm concerned. Former NSO CEO and ex-Austrian chancellor found the dream. CISO perspectives and insights from Brazil. Get rich writing tweets for rich people. Questioning quadrant qualifications. And one of the crazier squirrel stories we've had in recent months. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
Don't leave the door open. Secure your APIs with the Curity Identity Server. Curity allows you to centralize identity management policies with a solution developed by an expert team using well-established standards. Curity facilitates scalable security for apps and websites by offering a unique combination of identity and access management with API security. Protect your users, secure apps and websites, manage API access. Start your free trial today at securityweekly.com/Curity. Customers want fast and frictionless digital experiences, yet also expect protection against breaches, privacy violations, and fraud. Drive engagement by optimizing security and convenience to attract and retain customers. Use the PingOne cloud platform to build, test, and optimize digital experiences. The no-code orchestration engine weaves together authentication, user management, and MFA, all of which can enhance security, drive engagement, and boost revenues. Visit securityweekly.com/ping identity to learn more. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy Chicken and Waffles Day. This is episode 293, recorded on Thursday, October 20th, 2022. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is Sean Metcalf. How are you, Sean?
Doing great, Adrian. How are things with you?
Pretty good. I had to actually jump away from my script here because we've got some co-hosts that were delayed a bit today, but Sean was able to join us at the beginning here, and I'm really excited about this interview and slightly less excited about Chicken and Waffles Day. I'm not a huge Chicken and Waffles fan. I feel like it's a bit much putting all that together.
It is a bit much. It's like lunch and dinner in one, or breakfast and lunch and dinner in one meal.
Yeah, I've had it and it was tasty. It's just not something I would eat all the time. It's super rich.
No debate there.
Yeah, kind of like a fried Oreo. Like objectively, yes, it tastes good, but it's not going to be on the weekly menu.
Yeah, then you fall under the Dr. Ian Malcolm side of things. Like, just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should, and it's not for everyone. I like ice cream, but I don't necessarily want to fry my ice cream.
Exactly. And with that Jurassic Park reference, we will jump into the announcements. That's hitting the high points early. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms, which include YouTube and I was going to say Discord again. Gus, help me out. I'm drawing a blank. Twitch. Oh my goodness. Twitch. YouTube and Twitch. Thank you.
So nice. You got to say it twice.
Yeah, Gus with the save there. All right. Today's topic is, and I took some creative liberties putting together this title. I hope you're okay with that, Marty, but calling it Situational Awareness in an Age of Dispersed Assets and Atomized Networks.
That's a mouthful. I like it.
No, I'm having fun with it. So it's interesting. Well, let me finish introducing you here. For folks who don't know, Martin Roesch is the CEO at Netography. He's also well known for creating Snort, founding SourceFire, and building Cisco into a bit of a security company, and is also an early pioneer of the open core business model, which I actually had to look up. But welcome, Marty.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate you putting me on today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, it's pretty special. It's, again, something I didn't realize that came up just on our Slack discussing bringing you on the show. Somebody mentioned that you were I think the second show that was recorded and released, but it wasn't given a number. So it was just called it was a special edition of Paul's Security Weekly in between episodes 1 and 2 back in 2005.
Wow. Yeah.
Paul met up with you at Sands 2005 in LA, and there were sirens in the background, and it wasn't the best quality recording, but it was a really good conversation. And some of what I gleaned from giving that a listen now, all these many years later, kind of inspired some of that title, because that you talked a lot about situational awareness fabric back then.
Yeah,
which I think is a great, and I think that's one of your superpowers here is coming up with good metaphors and terms for understanding concepts. Yeah, I've noticed you've got a ton of them.
Yeah, it's I found that it's really necessary in the security world to have good metaphors to talk to people about it, because security is like super esoteric, and you really have to know a lot of kind of backstory to really make sense of the things that you're hearing. So one of the things I discovered as I was building SourceFire back in the old days was that you needed to be able to talk to people who had no idea what you were actually, had no foundation to even have an idea about what you were talking about. So good metaphors became like critical to be able to do it. And also, good metaphors to some degree, the demonstration that you understand the material enough to be able to draw, analogies in the, kind of the real world, as opposed to this very cyber digital, whatever world that we exist in today.
Yeah. And it's to put people in the right frame of mind, one of the questions was something about like your everyday carry, like what did you have with you? And, one of the things was a 60 gigabyte iPod video, to help people kind of put this stuff in context. I think there was a Treo that you also carried with you. Apple laptops Apple laptops were called PowerBooks still back then.
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
it was incredible. Pre-iPhone, it's fascinating. I really should go back and listen to it, because it's like, it'd be interesting to see what I was talking about then, because I bet you a lot of the themes are similar to what we talk about today, because the problem hasn't really changed all that much. It's kind of the venue or the architecture or the kind of the composition of the environment that you're trying to do it in has radically evolved. So, but the fundamental needs really don't change over time, like you expect they might.
Well, that's kind of what I intend to do today, is sprinkle bits of what you were talking about back then in with today, because you're spot on. There are definitely some parallels between the two. So yeah, back then, the current version of Snort was 2.4.3. SourceFire was 4 years old, and you had, and this was the thing I had to look up here, but you had to, what was it again? The open core business model. So totally familiar with that business model, but didn't realize it had that name. It's basically like, how do you create a business out of an open source product?
Yeah, well, that was it. I don't think it actually did have a name back then. Was I calling it open core back then?
No, that just came out of your bio.
Okay, yeah. So when I was contemplating getting SourceFire started, I had Snort, and Snort was everywhere, and it was being used very, very widely. So, there was a part of me that was basically saying, if you don't figure out how to make money on this, somebody else will. So, apply yourself. So I did. And I came up with this business model that really contemplated, what Snort was good at and what it was not good at. So Snort, in the small scale, it solves problems, but in the large scale, it causes problems, and the problems that it causes are different than the ones that it solves. So that was the insight that I had. And what I kind of became aware of as time marched on was that, enterprises want your function, but they want it in a form factor. And the form factor is they want it to be manageable, scalable. They want it to perform, provide automation, and be supported. So they want the Snort function, but manageability, scalability, performance, automation, and support have to surround it. And that's what SourceFire really delivered. So, this is back in late 2000 that I'm kind of cooking up this plan to go to the world of this business model. And, people didn't really believe in it back then. It's like, how do you sell something that's free? It's like, well, I've got this value added model for it. And people are like, that's ridiculous. The only reason that people are using your stuff was because it's free, not because it's good. So, take your silly idea and move on, young man. I kept plugging away at it. And once I had a product that was ready to go, I instantly had customers, which is kind of the crazy thing is that, we were selling to enterprise customers immediately, literally out of my house with SourceFire. And this open core model, eventually somebody came up with a name for it. And it's a thing that's real now. And you see this model repeated and perpetuated in a number of different industries now.
And it's interesting you saying that, back then people were saying, they're using it because it's free, not because it's good. Because I would contest that the reality is almost the opposite. I'm happy to pay $5 a month or, some small one-time amount, for a piece of software, that I don't have to compile myself, that I don't have to, read all the documentation to be able to use or work out dependency issues and use, there's just I've got a whole thread, a whole rant on this. Probably my most popular tweet ever was just ranting about how difficult it is to run most open source software out there. So, in that world also, like a lot of work goes into making sure your builds work, in different environments, making sure people know how to use the product, making sure the options and the configuration, options that you have make sense, and you have good defaults and things like that. And you have to worry about vulnerabilities as well.
Yeah. Oh, it was, I famously wrote a file that's included in the Snort distro called usage, which is just a text file that describes, 3 fundamental operational modes and how to get them going. And, it's just a very conversational tone on, okay, you're new to Snort and you've never used it before. And it's a sniffer, it's a packet logger, it's an IDS. And here's how to enable both, all 3 of those modes and kind of what to expect. And people loved it. It wasn't a huge document or anything like that. It was maybe about 2 or 3 pages of text. And that was like a huge deal. And, to your point, having sane defaults and stuff like that, that was one of the things that I found was almost the most powerful part of being the guy who wrote Snort was that I also controlled the snort.conf file, which meant that I effectively controlled the default configuration for intrusion detection for 80% of the users who were using it, which is like, probably 80% of the world that was doing intrusion detection. So had this kind of unbounded power to describe the default configuration for this huge chunk of the world that cared to do intrusion detection. And I became aware that was, a real responsibility as time wore on. But yeah, same defaults, all those sorts of things. It's funny what you start thinking about when you're building it, because eventually you come to realize, oh my God, all these people are using my spare time project here. I actually have to have a sense of responsibility about keeping them from shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah. And, sounds like that led to understanding that you had lightning in a bottle here. People were talking to you and saying, hey, you should do something with this, turn this into a company, and then you had to, get some customers and real revenue to get anybody to take you seriously is one of the things you were talking about on that, because back then, like the idea of, oh yeah, I'm taking this free product and going to build a company out of it, what wasn't terribly well received by VCs back in the day.
No. I got called, dumb a few times when I was trying to go to market with that concept. But no, it was, knowing your audience is kind of half the battle. So I became, so from supporting Snort and supporting all of its users and things like that, you see the emails coming into the mailing list and then emails coming to you personally. And you see, this bank is using it, this government agency is using it, this, this tech company is using it. It's like, wow, okay. So
you were effectively customer success for the product as well back then. So you had that feedback loop was a person of one in that feedback loop, right?
Oh, and you have no idea how, as a software developer, how fulfilling that is to actually have direct interaction with the users. That was like manna from heaven, because you could actually talk with them very directly about what do you like, what do you not like, what's working, what's not working, how would you change it. So the loop between you and the user didn't have to pass through product marketing and product management and go through requirements assessment and all the other stuff. Was just like, to some degree it was kind of fielder's choice what you felt like implementing. But to a large degree it was kind of, you talk to 20 people and you start like writing down what they want and you figure out where the intersections are. And it's like, okay, here's a roadmap for implementing. And so it was an incredibly powerful way to develop software. And, I became very opinionated about the value of open source in terms of what it delivers to its users. All things being equal, a commercial project and an open source project, I always believed that the open source project would very rapidly coalesce on the feature set that people actually wanted, much more rapidly than necessarily the commercial software, because the commercial software had to go through its iterations and had these areas of remove between the developers and the users, and also had to answer to the whims of the management team and what the sales team was seeing in the field, and things of that nature. And it's not really whims; it's kind of what they need to get their jobs done.
Sure.
So I should be circumspect about that now that I'm a CEO. Back then, it was a little more shoot from the hip. But yeah, it's an incredibly powerful way to develop software. And then, went to market. And I felt like I really fundamentally understood what people needed to make Snort kind of enterprise grade, all the things around it, the management infrastructure and stuff like that. And I was right. But yeah, taking that story to venture capital, don't forget this is 2001. So the dot-com crash was in progress when I was getting started.
Right.
Showing with a story of, I figured out how to get people to pay for stuff that's free. Story to venture capitalists was like, wow, that's interesting. Tell me when you make $1, now get out. And that's how it was. And then I didn't make $1. In fact, I made, several $100,000 per deal, selling off my back porch. And all of a sudden the venture capital community was like, oh, maybe there's something to this.
Nice. Yeah, because even security was fairly new back then. So not only was the IDS new, not only was the security industry new, the whole concept of, basing a for-profit company around an open source product was also new. So you had all these challenges. But yeah, money talks, right?
Money talks, sure does. Like, if you're right, the market's going to let you know.
Yeah, that's a great point, Adrian. I mean, from the perspective of having something that's brand new that the industry is not used to, there's no established market for that. Apple is built on other things. The iPod, when it came out, since we were talking about it, wasn't new at the time. There were other portable media players at the time, but they figured out how to make it better. So it's just kind of advancing and improving upon that. So what was your idea around, okay, I have this new thing that I think is important, how to get that out there? Was your approach to open source it and then maybe later make it a product? Or were you just like, this is a need, I think we should do this, this is the right thing to do?
Well, Snort came about because I was teaching myself how to do security. So I literally, I got started in security in 96 and I was doing stuff as a government contractor. And, teaching myself was part of, there were no degree programs or anything like that. If you're going to learn security in college, you're going to learn about cryptography. And that was about it. So if you wanted to learn how to do real-time network traffic analysis and intrusion detection or port scanning or making firewalls and things like that, the best way to do it was to write your own software. And I'm an engineer by education, so I wrote my own software. So Snort started out as me exploring how to write intrusion detection systems and kind of getting hooked into this kind of this dopamine pump of every week or two doing a release of Snort and getting feedback. Oh, this is really good, or change this, add that, that sort of thing. So before there was social networking, I guess Snort was my social network, and eventually I came to understand that people were widely deploying Snort. Like you had these major companies that were deploying these huge Snort footprints, and they were trying to manage them internally. There was no central management infrastructure for it. There was no rules distribution complex for it. Rules were developed by the community itself. So there were all these different rule sets that were out there. We didn't have any relationships with the vendors. So like on Microsoft Tuesday, we just had to wait till it popped up, then do all the analysis and reverse engineering to get new detections out and stuff like that. So I recognized that there was probably going to be a pretty substantial market in the enterprise, especially for companies that liked the Snort function, the capabilities that it brought to the table, and how it did what it did. And in fact, an entire generation of users was trained that that's the right way to attack the problem. And the other ways, the commercial ways, the black boxes that were out there that did the same sort of thing were the wrong way to do it. And so all I had to do is figure out, what's missing, what are they willing to pay for? And, selling to the enterprise makes a lot of sense, right? I sell to people who have a lot of money and also have a big problem. Right. It was kind of a match made in heaven in that regard. And it was, it just worked. It worked really, really well immediately.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I remember hanging a box off my internet service provider access, which of course back then in the early 2000s, you had direct access to the internet, having Snort running on it to see what would happen, what was going on with that. The fact that you could packet capture was pretty impressive. I also did a lot of government contracting at the time, and with the thing with the government is they didn't want to support open source. They had rules around how you could use open source. And ultimately they evolved into a rule where as long as there was someone they could pay for it, then they could leverage those products and really start supporting it because there was support behind it. Did you think about that before it, since you had done some government work, or was that something that just kind of happened naturally by making this company to support and have the management aspects to the product?
It happened kind of naturally. I did hear that kind of thing over time. Hey, we like to use this, but we need it to be commercial for us to, we need to be able to pay for something for us to use it in our environment, because that's kind of the rules around here. I didn't specifically target the government, but so much of the government was using Snort by the time I even got started that we had very natural uptake immediately. And this was just before or right around the time period that things like common criteria were coming into effect. So Snort itself was widely penetrated into the government. In fact, governments all over the world. So when the product came along, there was a lot of demand for it right away, which kind of started the flywheel of there's money there, so let's go do what we got to do to go get access to it. And these customers, they wanted it as well. We're using Snort. We're going to deploy you guys because you're the Snort guys, and that's what we use around here. And we're willing to pay for it, and at government rates and all that stuff. So we had a pretty good government business at SourceFire. I think it was about 20 to 25% of our business typically. So it was they were a good customer. Provided great feedback. They're always very appreciative too of both the open source and the commercial. So it was a nice relationship that we had with the government in the SourceFire days. But you saw it also at enterprises where they're like, we can't use your stuff until we can pay for it and get support. Like we have an open source policy that requires somebody to be out there for it.
Yeah. So I want to connect it with the present a little bit here. I want to talk a bit about visibility. And going back and listening to that interview, you're talking about what inspired you to create Snort, and you were trying to look at RPC payloads, and the packet captures were all in hex and didn't have like the ASCII column, so you were sitting there transcribing hex to ASCII by hand, like on a piece of paper or something like that to figure out what was in these payloads. And fast forward to today. And I think visibility still seems very much like a challenge. You still see a lot of people, like maybe they're using a tool, to do that translation. But a lot of products today, produce a lot of data, produce a lot of alerts. They can do a lot of useful things, but for it to really be considered visibility, I feel like that's something we haven't really gotten that much closer to. Like, we got a little bit closer to it, but then we seemed so focused on being completionist, having an alert for everything, like take the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. Like we're going to have a detection. We're going to make a detection for everything and treat everything as equal. When in the real world, maybe that's not the case. So it's interested in your opinion on. I mean, what was driving Snort? Is that what's driving Netography today? That everything's still very kind of chaotic and unorganized, and the need for visibility where you need it, when you need it.
Yeah, I think it's it's similar but different. Visibility where you need it, when you need it, is actually a big deal right now. So here's kind of our viewpoint on it now. So the thing about Snort is like a scalpel, right? You put it at a point in the network, and then you give it a configuration. And the Snort rules are very simple. They tell you tell Snort what to look for, and it tells you when it sees it. That's its whole job. But the things that it looked for are very discrete packet level detections of things like attacks or anomalies or things like that. What Snort doesn't have is like a very broad vantage point of the total network, because Snort can't record everything. You can put Snort into packet logger mode, and it can, like, every packet that passes through it, you can have obviously drop to the disk, but that's not a great thing to do. It's performance intensive, and it's also it takes up a lot of disk space, obviously, especially on modern networks. So that's a problem. And so much of the traffic is encrypted now. Also, recording packets so you can look back at them later, like most of them are just going to be effectively line noise. So that's a big set of problems. And, Netography is almost like, in a lot of ways, the opposite of Snort. And in some ways, there was another technology we developed at SourceFire that I probably talked about in 2005 called RNA, or Real-Time Network Awareness technology, which was also a deep packet inspection system. So the problem that we have with deep packet inspection today on modern network architectures post-pandemic is that modern network architectures are dispersed. This is when we talk about these atomized networks, that's kind of what we're talking about, right? So what happened when the pandemic hit? Everybody got sent home, and you used to do a project where I'm going to move the data center in Houston to the cloud, and we have a project manager, and we have all the stakeholders get in a conference room and do weeklies, and then they turn out readouts to the CIO, and then eventually all the boxes are checked and everybody's happy, and they move the thing to the cloud. That was pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, everybody got sent home, and it's like, just get your job done. So people did. They just stood up whatever they needed, wherever they needed it immediately. And today we're into what we call the atomized network, right? We have these multi-cloud, hybrid cloud with on-prem enterprise networks now. Well, try deploying deep packet inspection technology in a relevant place in that world, right? So these networks I came up with a thing for it like literally 2 weeks ago. They're dispersed, ephemeral, encrypted, and diverse, right? So dispersed, they're in the cloud, they're on-prem. They could be just about anywhere. They could be an OT network someplace. They could be a space station. They could be a submarine. They could be a research base in Antarctica, for all we know. So you've got that issue of locality. Where are these things and when are they there? You got the encryption problem. Obviously, Snort is radically different depending on what it can do, depending on where it is and if it's exposed to encryption or not. If it's exposed to encryption, it can't really tell you a whole lot. Traffic has to be decrypted for it to be able to do its thing. And then you've got this, ephemeral things come and go. You need to be where we need you when we need you there. That doesn't work very well for a kind of a static defense like a DPI technology. And then diverse, like IT, OT, cloud, could be anything. So you got to be able to incorporate that everywhere you are. So I've been noodling on this a lot, especially over the last few months, talking about, comparing and contrasting what we have built, which is a pure SaaS. We don't look at packets, we look at flows, but flows show up in real time, so we can still have a real-time vantage point in the network. And to your point from your episode title at the beginning, we really are delivering a situational awareness platform that's truly a situational awareness platform because we can look at everything. We use a real-time rules and model engine to be able to extract an event on things that are happening. But because we're dealing with network metadata and streaming it all off to disk, regardless of whether or not we detect something, it's a radically smaller set of data. But if you need to do look back and threat hunting and stuff like that, or rerun a query set on this data that's been stored, you can do it. So it really changes the game and gives you a much more operational real-time view into the network, while also having this ability to do, what we call retrospection, to be able to look back and dig stuff up when you need to. So it's quite powerful, and it's delivering similar capabilities that you get with a intrusion detection engine or an NDR platform, but it's doing it in a very, very different way with an extremely different footprint. There's no software or hardware to deploy, which is radically different. And because of the way the thing's licensed, it's subscription instead of being licenses that are running on appliances to enable the management channels and integrated with a centralized management platform. It's not like that at all. It's like, oh, you've got capacity in your license. You need to stand up visibility in Italy today. Well, you don't need to call us. You've got capacity in your license. So just like spin it up and you're up and running, and that's it. You'd be up in, minutes. Netography doesn't need to get involved at all. So if you need to shift, to a different place to have visibility on your network, or just expand your visibility, if you got capacity in your license, You're good to go. If you don't have capacity in your license, we'll just true up with you later. You don't even have to call us for that.
Right. Sean, real quick, I know Sean has a question, but since you mentioned licensing like that, I don't know if I should name names, but back when breach detection products were kind of the big hotness, these appliances that would analyze malware, kind of capture it on the network and analyze it in real time. Kind of the big 800-pound gorilla in the space at a time licensed them by box. So when we were buying one of these, which I actually recommended against, but that's a different conversation. We could only afford one box, so of course we put it in the headquarters. But all our malware issues were all in the sales offices, the manufacturing, all the smaller places where we couldn't put this $250,000 box. And lo and behold, competitors came into the business with a consumption-based license model where it was by bandwidth. So basically you would buy like a certain gigabits of bandwidth, and you could use off the rack, servers, install their software on it, put it on a Intel NUC, like whatever you need to get the job done, right? And just put it wherever you want. Don't have to contact anybody about licensing. And it took a couple years for that 800-pound gorilla, who had just incredible churn to fix their license model and capture some of that back.
Yeah, letting people have autonomy is a big deal, right? That, especially when you have an emergent situation going on, letting people kind of do what they need to do when they need to do it is important. And we never really talked about, and it was less of a big deal, 15 plus years ago. We never really talked about the issue of where you need it, when you need it, very much back then. The last time I did this podcast, but that's always been kind of an issue, and we kind of papered it over. You can use gigamounts or whatever to get your packet taps and get the traffic you need where you need it on the one hand, but on the other hand, not always, and especially when things kind of go off the rails, not exactly where you need it when you need it a lot of times. So yeah, it's very interesting. Because this is so different, and the model is different from a consumption standpoint for this kind of network visibility. I don't think it's really existed like this before.
So you mentioned the flow perspective of this, which I think makes sense, especially when you're looking at on-prem versus cloud versus wherever activity and actions are happening. And certainly with the current world being what it is, identity becomes the next part of that. So how does what your approach, how does that handle the different identities, or even ensuring that the identity that's connecting to something and now connecting to something else across those flows is the same identity or same person that's handling that identity or acting as that identity? How do you take that into account?
So we treat identity and a lot of kind of metadata about the environment that we're in as context. We just added a new feature set to the product literally about a month ago that is essentially, it's a context labeling system within the platform now that allows you to load context in. So user identity information, system information, names of devices, security groups that they're in, all of those sorts of things, and then write policy around it. So analysis and detection models as policy, as well as, response and things like that. So if you have Active Directory or Okta or whatever, if we can get access via the APIs to the information, or if you can just bulk load it into the system, which in your case, at the time of connection, bulk loading obviously doesn't work. You need to get it on the fly. All those things are possible with the addition of context labels, which means that you can essentially start writing policies that are attached to labels in our system. So you can say things like, all these devices are covered under HIPAA. And if they start doing behaviors that are, not HIPAA compliant, then let us know. So, simple stuff like that. Or, this is Marty, and he's an executive at the company, and he's in the executive security group. And, here are the classes of activity we never want to see an executive security group person to be doing. It should never be streaming data to an ITAR country or something like that. So all those things are doable. So what it really allows us to transition to doing is writing our detection models, not just in terms of, this is a DDoS and this is anomalous behavior of, this system is doing stuff that it doesn't usually do and things like that, to these are PCI compliant devices and, they don't talk outside the network. And these are, executives, and they have this set of constrained behaviors, and, these are whatever, these are desk phones and they talk to call centers. And if they don't, then that's an issue too. So all those kind of classes of things become available, even down to the point of identifying, associating the context with an activity down to a user.
So if I'm following you accurately on this, then you could actually identify the difference in context of a person being on-prem in, their office, authenticating through Active Directory, then jumping through Federation to connect to a cloud resource, versus a user that's coming through VPN and then getting authenticated by something like Okta, or even connecting in from an AWS or Azure instance. Being able to have context around those provides some insight into what potential activity should be expected and even approved to a certain approach, correct?
Yeah, all those kinds of things are possible in this platform. And, it's very powerful. I've been on the context bandwagon literally for 22 years. I started becoming a context believer in about the year 2000. We put our money where our mouth was back at SourceFire when we built RNA, which was a context generation platform. And we have brought it to Netography basically and added this feature set in because once again, context is king. Like, security events don't just happen. They happen to something or to someone. And you need to be able to deliver that information or consider that information before you alert, operators, so that you can have high value detections and high value responses or responses that are meaningful and impactful, not just responses that are kind of random, right? Because in most security technologies that are doing detection, you have a very high number of false positives all the time. So if you can't contextualize them and say, I don't care about these because they're definitely false positives, this event can't affect this device, or this user is doing stuff that is approved. If you can't do that sort of thing, then, being able to take the next step and do automated responses is extremely difficult because people get ticked off when the CEO gets fired up when you shut off his email because some machine learning model got tipped over and said, "Oh, this is a bad thing, and now I'm going to stop it."
Absolutely, and I think what we're seeing in better systems now is really the approach around when there's an alert that's a meaningful alert, and there's an action that's supposed to be associated with that. And you mentioned false positives. Are there ways through your system where you're able to tune out false positives or enable the customer to better tune to say, okay, well, this would normally be an issue, but in our environment, this is actually okay. And we kind of expect that given these specific contexts.
Yeah, exactly. So we're working. So there's a few things in system already. So we have thresholding and stuff like that. So looking for things like anomalous file transfers out of device. Well, if you have devices that are always generating the same kind of level of behavior in terms of the amount of files that they transfer, the amount of volume that they're transferring off the device, you can use the threshold. We're working on mechanisms right now well, A, to expose them to you manually so you can tweak them manually, but B, to be able to adjust them on the fly based on our system kind of observing the behavior and then tweaking the thresholds as they go. So that's, some of that is kind of machine learning. I'm not a huge machine learning cheerleader because I know what it can do and what it can't do. And I think this industry gets out over its skis, so to speak, and promoting its virtues and ignoring its sins. But I think that, there's a lot of cool stuff like that to allow you to squelch, to allow you to do false positive rejection, either by leveraging context or by doing things like, having exceptions in the system. Under these conditions, we're not going to fire this event. And we have a full language in the system that lets you describe and do logic around basically any individual element that we're capable of servicing. And we have hundreds of things that we're capable of servicing in the system. So it's quite powerful. It's actually, in a lot of ways, it has more capability for kind of being able to be shaped than a snort-like engine does. So it's interesting in that way. And it tells you stuff about your network that's basically almost impossible to find out any other way, including intrusion detection systems that I built my career on. I mean, this does different stuff, but it will tell you things that you will see no other way.
So the two E's in your acronym DEED, the ephemeral and encrypted, so first the ephemeral, one thing I used to ask a lot of companies back when I was an industry analyst was, because there are a lot of companies saying, yeah, we work fine in the cloud, referring to the cloud as EC2, and maybe it's an agent-based company, and saying, sure, you can install our agent there. But then my next question is like, okay, what if this is, a company that's auto scaling resources up and down? How's your dashboard look if I create and destroy 8,000 instances in AWS today? Like, does it, does it know how to display that information? Like, clearly different kinds of resources you have to treat a bit differently. Otherwise they just, they kind of DOS the interfaces that the analysts use. And then the question on the encrypted side is clearly that's another big change that we've seen since 2005. I forget what percentage of websites were HTTPS back then, but it wasn't a huge percentage. It certainly wasn't everything like today. And, encryption in general has been, so pervasive that, a lot of products like Netography kind of had to, you gotta, I'll let you tell me, but obviously you had to kind of shift product strategy there a bit, or your tactics and how you understand what's going on, or use TLS inspection, which I know a lot of people aren't fans of.
Yeah, well, TLS inspection is kind of it's expensive. Like, it's computationally expensive, it's financially expensive, it requires curation, care and feeding and stuff like that, just like anything else, any other components. So you've got all that kind of stuff. Well, I think part of as they say, part of getting as better as admitting you've got a problem, right? So in the traffic analysis world, we've been band-aiding the fact that encryption is becoming more and more pervasive for a long time, just either ignoring it or, deploy this $50,000 encryption or decryption platform, or, we've got decryption capabilities baked into the hardware on our next-gen firewall, and if you turn it on, you're going to pay an 80% performance penalty, but you'll be able to see. And it's like, okay, we're kind of ripping the Band-Aid off and saying, hey, you know what? Everything's going to be encrypted. So let's get over trying to look inside the packets to see what's going on, which is one of the reasons that we went with Flow. So we're a metadata platform. We're looking at metadata about the network, and we're looking at the metadata about the context of the network as well to pull together the picture of what's going on, instead of trying to look at every packet and put together every flow and things like that, because it's not going to work. Like, the juice isn't going to be worth the squeeze 5 years from now. 5 years ago, there was a lot less of it than there is now. 5 years from now, there's going to be a lot more of it. And the amount of money that you've got to pay to get the capabilities that are delivered for the amount of overhead that's required in terms of manpower and curation of the technology and the detection rule set and trying to deal with the data that comes out of them, and then not having the surrounding data that you need when an event does go off to, kind of follow the threat and stuff like that, versus just saying, hey, you know what, all traffic's going to be encrypted, so we need to get into a system that doesn't care anymore and is fundamentally architected to live in that world. We can live off the land there still. And if we stop trying to dig into the packets and start working on methods to be able to surface information from the data set we can still get for free. We used to be able to get packets for free. We can't anymore, but we can get flows for free, and we can get context information about the environment for free. Then we should do that. And we should build the best platform we can that does that and give people the ability to comprehend their atomized networks as one entity. Not just a collection of, my Azure cloud, my Amazon cloud, my on-prem stuff with different vendors and different tools and different languages and, different teams that run them. So you got that whole issue. And I think that's like, hey, what if we just like rethought the problem and went after it that way, which is basically what we're doing here at Netography. And then you've got, the ephemeral question that you're talking about. So we're capable of loading real-time context like from VPCs as they fire up and loading them into the back end. And we anticipate and incorporate the ephemeral nature of all that into our displays and into how we do things. So done instance IDs and things like that. So we can use that to associate like activities and things of that nature. So we're built for this world. We're built for the world we're in, the world that we're going to, not the one that existed 15 years ago, and trying to perpetuate that model forward, which is where so many of the older solutions are. But at the same time, and this is important, this is one thing, I don't know that I would call it a pet peeve, but it's something that's really, I think it's interesting. You basically have two classes of vendors out there. You have the older school vendors who have on-prem infrastructure, and they have cloud appliances, and they have also cloud properties that they've bought. And then you have the pure cloud guys who only think about the cloud, don't think about on-premise at all. Well, this hybrid world, this atomized world, is going to be the way it's going to be. So you have to actually incorporate all of it and look at it as one composite of all these pieces instead of on-prem, multi-cloud, blah, blah, blah. You have to look at it as one thing and have one language to talk about it. And that's one of the things, I call it the Tower of Babel problem. You have to have one way to kind of, give people a place to go and a language to use to be able to work in that world. It's kind of a clean sheet approach in some ways.
Yeah, it certainly helps that we can get flows from cloud providers now. It wasn't always the case, but so at least Tower of Babel you need, but at least you don't need also a Rosetta Stone on top of that. At least you're still speaking flows everywhere where you're grabbing that data, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yep. Flows are everywhere. All your enterprise network infrastructure supports it. All of your cloud providers support it. There's a lot of other stuff that's supported as well. So if you can talk flows or IPFix, we can import the data into our platform.
Awesome. Great conversation, Marty. Thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Thanks for having me. It's great talking to you guys.
All right, and stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk MRIs for the cloud with Edward Wu from ExtraHop. When it comes to cybersecurity, the biggest threats are the ones you never see coming. SecureWorks detects and responds to cyber attackers' ever-changing tactics. We come armed with Taegis, a security analytics platform designed to recognize attacks and stop them before they do harm. SecureWorks, defending every corner of cyberspace. Learn more at securityweekly.com/SecureWorks. The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation of cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, and prove compliance in audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, so our second interview today is sponsored by ExtraHop. Edward Wu joins us to talk about an MRI for the cloud, network data for cloud visibility, detection, and IR. Edward is a senior principal data scientist at ExtraHop, holds over 10 ML and cybersecurity patents, and is a contributor to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Welcome to the show, Edward.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you here. Definitely a great topic. Very, very interesting topic. We were just talking about how it's visibility in the cloud has been much improved since the different cloud vendors have added the ability to grab flows, to peer into network data. I think there was this kind of awkward time in the cloud where to get that data, you kind of had to fool around with routing in your VPCs and stand up like an EC2 proxy or something like that and funnel all your data through an actual appliance in the cloud, which was not ideal, right?
Yeah. So in the last few years, the network as a data source has been more heavily adopted by the practitioners, which obviously prompted the big cloud service providers to improve their support for the acquisition of the network data in the cloud. Obviously, VPC flow logs and flow logs of various types is one example. But in addition to that, various cloud service providers also improved the ability to mirror full packets from different workloads as well.
So before we dive in too deep into some of the details there, help me understand what you do at ExtraHop as a senior principal data scientist. It's I could think of that going in a bunch of different directions, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of interested in what your role is there and what kind of stuff that you get to play with in your job, because it sounds like it'd be really interesting stuff that you get to do. Yeah.
So I definitely have many different hats at ExtraHop. You can say my day job is leading our AI ML and detection products. So that involves building new machine learning models, building detection capabilities and machine learning infrastructures that enable our cloud-based machine learning service to detect, as well as help our customers to investigate potential cyber attacks in their networks. But in addition to leading our AI ML and detection efforts, I'm also spearheading our product's expansion to cloud workload security, because obviously cloud workload is a key part of the future of IT. And we as ExtraHop do see a tremendous need and opportunity where right now the security teams are struggling to understand different aspects of the workload that's running in their cloud accounts. And we felt like our technology could help.
So just to clarify, because in my head, I might have an old school definition of cloud workload security, but generally workload to me sounds like you're installing an agent or somehow getting telemetry from a system where you control the operating system, but maybe that also extends to containers and more abstracted, maybe even serverless stuff. So help me understand what you mean when you say cloud workload.
Yeah, so by cloud workload, we are defining any code that executes in a customer's cloud accounts to be cloud workload. And obviously that includes the traditional subset of cloud workloads that most people are familiar with, such as infrastructure as a service, as well as containers. But in addition to that, there are also other types of workloads in the cloud, such as platform as a service, as well as serverless. And ExtraHop, our focus is to utilize network data to provide comprehensive visibility as well as detection and insights to all types of workloads in the cloud. Because as you mentioned, a lot of legacy cloud workload security technologies rely on the installation of agents. And obviously agents is one of the 3 foundational data sources for cybersecurity. However, there are many practical challenges with the deployment as well as coverage of agents in the cloud. And that's where network data could help.
Gotcha. Yeah, and so I imagine you'd be collecting. We mentioned flow logs, but in addition to that, perhaps logs from the control plane itself. So CloudWatch, stuff like that. And maybe other, I guess, more function-specific cloud data. So not necessarily from the cloud, but from systems that live. You said pretty much everything in any code that runs inside the cloud instance.
Yep.
So that's a lot of different stuff. How do you decide, like, is the goal to grab all of it and then sort things out, or is it more, you mentioned you work with customers on some of these problems. Is this something where you more add the different sources of data as you need them to solve a problem?
Yeah. So as a data scientist, my natural intention or inclination is to grab all the data first, but obviously practically that's not very easy to do for a variety of reasons. And right now our focus is starting with the data sources that we are most familiar with, as well as we are most differentiated at and can unlock differentiated customer value. And that the starting point of that is flow logs as well as full packets. And the reason being, obviously there are many types of workloads in the cloud. And from our perspective, if you look at cloud workloads, there are actually 2 planes of behaviors. There is what we consider as the CSP management plane. So those are the things such as like IAM roles, credentials. And then there's the traditional data plane where you can say packets fly across different devices. There are a lot of existing cloud security solutions that focus on management plane. There are a lot of tools out there that can detect public-facing or S3 buckets. There are tools that can detect IAM privilege escalation, stuff like that. But that's only part of the cloud workload security. Another part of the cloud workload security lies within the data plane, which is where kind of traditionally attackers and defenders have been fighting with each other in the on-prem data centers as well as corporate networks. Right now, attackers are utilizing a lot of cloud management plane techniques because the lack of tooling and the lack of the relative immaturity in a lot of the deployments out there. But we do anticipate that over time, as people do a better job locking up public-facing S3 buckets, as well as plugging some low-hanging fruits, such as IMDS v1 and some of the IAM credential misuses and low-hanging exploits, we do anticipate the attacker to be driven back to the traditional data plane, where attackers, in order to break into a system in the cloud, they still have to rely on traditional approaches, such as obviously network remote code execution, exploits, brute forcing, as well as lateral movement and various pivoting techniques. And this, the data plane of the cloud workloads, is one that we at ExtraHop is focusing on right now.
So your coverage across these different areas, specifically infrastructure as a service, IaaS to service as a service, SaaS, and platform as a service, PaaS, certainly there's different data sources from a logging perspective, and being able to incorporate those different elements into how you can capture and have some good visibility around those environments. What are some of the challenges that you find in monitoring these systems and providing some good detail for your customer as far as how to track potentially malicious activity, especially when infrastructure as a service, you could potentially have an agent as well as some log flow data, as well as some network data. Whereas with service as a service, you're just going to get log data, event log data.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't think we have a perfect answer right now, but there are definitely a few key points we have observed after working with customers to help them secure their cloud workloads, as well as ourselves. I would say the first point is security teams and development teams or application teams move at a different pace. And for a long time, even for on-premise data centers, we have observed this kind of velocity gap where the application teams will deploy certain application, and then the security teams will catch up to those new applications and start to add in or bolt on additional security controls. And actually, this phenomenon or this delay is exponentially worse or larger in the cloud from our perspective, because cloud enables developers and application owners to innovate and build at a much faster pace than they were able to within the on-premise data centers. And because of that, one aspect we notice is very important for the cloud workload security teams is the ability to monitor assets and secure assets with in a very non-intrusive way, so that they don't stop or impede the velocity of the developers. And because of that, a lot of times, some of the traditional cloud workload security data sources, such as agents and logs, could be a little bit tricky to deploy because they involve some sort of consent as well as collaboration from the developers or application owners. And in comparison, network as a data source, either it's the flow log, level metadata, or full packets, neither of those two types of network data sources require explicit consent or collaboration from the application owners and the developers. And from our experience, the non-intrusiveness of the ability to provide visibility is really important for securing cloud workloads.
Oh, good. Thank you for that. Follow-up question around that, though. When you're looking at these different types of sources, so say you're looking at event log information from the SaaS component of the cloud, say Azure, because that's what I'm familiar with. So you're looking at Azure AD event logs. How do you go about correlating those, leveraging ML or AI in your system in order to correlate that sort of activity with what's occurring in the IaaS platform? So Azure, for this example, as far as ensuring that what activity is occurring is expected or appropriate, or could it be potentially malicious? Like, what are some of the triggers that you're looking at around that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one thing I do want to preface by saying right now, at this moment, we're not really looking at Azure AD data specifically. Right now, we are primarily focused on network data sources, which, as I said, are flow logs as well as full packets. And in terms of correlation between the two types of network data sources, obviously there are a few keys or identifiers that are fairly static, right? For example, every cloud resource generally has a unique instance ID. And obviously, a single instance could have different IP addresses assigned to them over time, or even different MAC addresses. But by correlating IP addresses we observe from the network data sources with the instance metadata, such as the globally unique instance IDs, that give us a really strong indicator or identifier to correlate different behaviors. And in addition to that, I think you mentioned, obviously within Azure, there are certain services that you have, like the only way to get visibility is through log or event integration. But from our experience, for a lot of the other type of, you can say, workload or compute-based services, for at least AWS specifically, and obviously Azure and GCP have their own variants of flow log capabilities. But at least within AWS, one concrete example will be for Lambda functions, which is a type of serverless offering in AWS. You can actually get flow logs from Lambda functions. And that's also really powerful and really allows security companies like us to provide comprehensive visibility, so that when we have a Lambda function that's talking to a like Elastic load balancer, that's talking to a web server running on an EC2 instance, we will have end-to-end visibility by joining the flow log behaviors we monitor on the Lambda functions, along with the full packets that we could mirror from the load balancers in the middle, as well as the servers running on the EC2 instance.
That's really fascinating. I had no idea you could get flow log data from Lambda. So that's very interesting. I learned something new today, so I appreciate that. So relating to what you were talking about with the IaaS and getting the IaaS components and getting flow logs and network information, one of the challenges that I've seen customers have certainly is different capabilities across the different IaaS, or at least the primary IaaS platforms, from AWS to Azure to GCP. Also with that are the different capabilities from a security perspective, but also just in general, what can be done with those different platforms and having different nomenclature across them. How are you with ExtraHop providing that visibility for customers, and sort of for customers that are in all three? Because certainly I've seen customers that are definitely in AWS and Azure, but also GCP. How are you helping customers provide that or provide that cohesive visibility across the multiple cloud platforms as well as the on-prem platforms, so that they see the cohesive single pane of glass, so to speak, across those, so they have a good understanding of what's happening?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. And I would say it's a continuous challenge, right? Like with the rise of the big cloud service providers and their interest in locking in customers and differentiate, they kind of fragment the developer experience. Because nowadays, as a developer for AWS, you get to use things that are quite different from a developer's working on GCP or Azure has. And this kind of developer or fragmentation definitely makes security companies as well as security teams' jobs quite difficult. For ExtraHop, we have a two-pronged approach. The first approach is relying on the fact that, hey, network packets is network packets, regardless if they are flying through AWS data centers or flying through Azure data centers. TCP is still TCP, HTTP is still HTTP, and DNS is still DNS. And thanks to this, essentially network data being the common denominator across all three or all large cloud service providers, as well as on-premise data centers, that give us a really solid foundation to build our analytics, because we are relying mostly on network data, which is, you could argue to some extent, very similar, if not exactly the same, across all environments. But on top of that, we do have to make a number of per CSP product changes. For example, the type of metadata you can ingest from different CSPs is different. In addition to that, different CSPs have specific background traffic, for example, that the tool or the product will need to be better at understanding, and different CSPs obviously have subtle differences that either introduces new detection opportunities or introduce, you can say, potential new attack vectors or attack techniques that as a security product we need to pay more attention to.
Great. Thank you very much for the answer.
All right. So talking about some of the use cases here, I think we mentioned IR. We mentioned a few different things there. Maybe we can dive into some of what customers are doing with the products. Where they're finding value in it, and what most of all, like what do you see in this product that really turns the light bulb on for customers and makes them realize kind of the value out of it, that they weren't getting anywhere else?
Yeah. So from our experience, there are multiple value propositions of our product. The most foundational one is probably the pure visibility of seeing something that previously they had no visibility into. And one concrete example would be kind of similar in kind of, you can say, physical security. When you turn on a light in the room, you start to see different pieces of furniture or items on the floor in a room. Enabling turning on the visibility for cloud workloads oftentimes has a similar effect. And one concrete example will be when we first were testing our product, we actually turned it on in our own data center. And we also actually noticed something that's quite interesting, where we had a database service, and we actually noticed a specific Lambda function that's querying this database service very periodically. And for a while, everybody was scratching their head a little bit and wondering, like, why is that Lambda service hitting, or is that Lambda function hitting the database service? But after a while, after tracking down the owner and looking at the code a little bit, we figured out, okay, it's a periodic database cleanup job that our data engineers have built. But as a security team, when you get this kind of visibility where you can see what's actually happening to the workloads, that provides a lot of opportunities for both knowledge, because obviously you cannot secure something you don't know what it is supposed to do, as well as other areas such as basic asset inventory, dependency mapping, as well as posture management.
Yeah, there's an allegory a friend of mine loves to use where, he says you walk up on, you're walking down the sidewalk and you come upon somebody searching for something on the ground, and they're searching under a streetlight, and you say, did you lose something? And they say, yeah, I lost my keys. You say, did you lose your keys here? And they say, no, I lost them over there, but I can see what I'm doing here. So I'm searching over here.
Yep.
And I think that's a good allegory for what you're talking about here, where people will use the tools they have, and oftentimes it's easy to forget that, there's stuff in the dark, in those other places. Like, I think Lambda's a great example there, because it wouldn't even occur to me that you could get flow logs from Lambda. I wouldn't even look for it. I would have just naturally left those out.
Yeah. Having flow logs enabled, or having Lambda functions generating flow logs is definitely a big plus to, from my perspective, to the entire security community, because Lambda functions are a little bit obviously more difficult to secure. Like, you cannot install agents on Lambda functions, and Lambda functions, because they are so lightweight, you can say a lot of times they are not very high up on the asset inventory list versus like EC2 instances or databases. Right. But Lambda function can execute a lot of code. There have been attack tools out there that actually allow attackers to create backdoors using Lambda functions. And those of the techniques obviously that definitely makes security teams' life quite difficult. But yeah, having network visibility to serverless workloads is super powerful, and it also makes sense, right? Because to some extent, at the end of the day, the purpose of a workload is to create some value or execute some automation. And because everything is so interconnected, it makes sense for the workloads to continue to obviously communicate through the network with other workloads. And even when one cannot install agents on those workloads, as I mentioned earlier, network data continue to be like a very large, or you can argue to some extent, the biggest common denominator across all type of workloads.
Yeah, I imagine one of the, some of the big value of a product like this, and it kind of goes along with how I used to train incident handlers, is that if you don't have a good baseline for what's going on in your network, there's a lot of, and even talking about kind of how people use Lambda, there's a lot of weird stuff going on that might look malicious, but it's just your company does something in a weird way, or a non-standard way. Even in commercial software, I often see, companies doing things a certain way because it works, but it looks really sketchy. It looks like something only an attacker would do. So I imagine, is that one of the use cases? Do your customers spend a lot of time just going through? And is that an option where they can kind of use the product to understand their environment better, and to get kind of a baseline on, say, for example, I'm investigating an EC2 instance. Like I need to know what it normally talks to, right? Like I need to understand what that baseline is. Like, is the thing I'm seeing normal for this box, or is this an anomaly?
Yeah, definitely. So there are a few different ways to use a product and leverage our visibility. Obviously, the easiest way to get started is probably to just manually use a product, and because we have really great visualization on different behaviors of different assets or workloads within the account. So one could definitely pivot to that. One could actually also plot an activity map or a application dependency map, showcasing, okay, for a given EC2 instance, like who else is this EC2 instance talking to? And sometimes, to be frank, looking at the dependency or activity map of an EC2 instance provides more operational context than looking at the labels that developers or tags that developers have added. Because a lot of times developers don't do the best job in the world describing or even naming the different workloads or EC2 instances, but the behaviors don't lie. So by looking at the behavior of specific workloads, the security teams can quickly identify the intended use of that workload and make, you can say, intelligent decisions on whether the observed behavior on the network of a given workload matches the intended use of that workload. So that's one aspect. Another way to use our product, obviously, as a data scientist, we didn't let go of the opportunity to build machine learning models in this case as well. So our product actually has many built-in machine learning models that also kind of performs this kind of analytics for our customers. So one example would be, let's say there is an Elastic load balancer, and then there are a bunch of web servers behind the single Elastic load balancer. And if we start to see maybe one of the web server starting to communicate outbound, for example, establishing an outbound LDAP connection, our machine learning model will actually catch that automatically as well.
Subtle log4shell reference there.
Yeah. So we also have machine learning models as well to perform this type of analysis.
Yeah. So sorry, interrupted there. You're right at the end, but I noticed that was probably a log4j, log4shell reference. Do you have any anecdotes or examples, of this? Obviously anonymous, or I don't know if you have any that have been cleared to talk about publicly, but any examples of stuff that customers have used the product to intercept or find, like maybe in a attack in progress or something like that you can share?
Yeah, that's a good question. unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to share any of those war stories right now. But I will share one thing, which is actually pretty interesting, because when we were testing our product capabilities, obviously we deploy a lot of these. We deploy like the beta version or alpha version of our product internally, and we definitely, during the process, we didn't obviously detect any attacks or real attacks within our own data centers, but we definitely detected or saw a few, you can say, kind of unexpected behaviors, in the sense that, like I said, because developers and application owners move so quickly, a lot of times somebody just toss up a random EC2 instance and have it do something and then forget about it. So over time, like the team start to forget, okay, we actually had that EC2 instance over there doing something super important. And when we actually deploy our product internally and use it, we kind of, our application teams and security teams actually use our product to identify, you can say, a few previously unknown or maybe forgotten quirks about our own workloads, which I think is pretty cool, because like I said, a lot of times it is very important to understand the workloads when you try to secure them, because ultimately, you can say, obviously different people have different definition of secure, but one could argue one definition of secure will be the workloads behaving with malicious intent, new behaviors that are not expected for the original use of that workload. And in order to detect some of these, the security teams as well as application teams really need to have a good understanding of what are all the workloads in the environment, what exactly are they doing, and what each workload, what behaviors each workload are expected to be observed. And our product provides a great validation and sometimes offer opportunities of discovery as well to identify, you can say, unknown artifacts or previously unknown behaviors, but that are actually benign, but somebody forgot about. And to some extent, we saw a lot of these cases for our on-premise customers as well. When they turn on our product, a lot of times they discover, oh, I didn't know I have a database over there that 5 of my most important application servers are still talking to. We were actually about to turn off that rack because we saw nobody is talking to it and stuff like that. So this kind of general workload visibility it is tremendously valuable.
Yeah, I think if you told somebody 40 years ago that computers would be so cheap and easy to deploy that you forget about them, like they're socks, like yep. I need more sock. I'm missing sock pairs here. It's funny, but yeah, it happens all the time. Maybe you do proof of concept. Maybe the PR team, stands up, temporary infrastructure or WordPress for a 6-month campaign and forget to shut it down at the end of the campaign. It's almost like when we deploy resources in the cloud, we should deploy them with expiration dates, right? Yeah, exactly. I think the SOC analogy is fantastic because that's exactly what happens to a lot of accounts or cloud accounts. Obviously, most large customers have multiple cloud accounts. Some of them are for production service. Some of them are for more ephemeral and ad hoc stuff. But over time, we definitely see this proliferation of people creating, you can say, one-time or ad hoc or ephemeral workloads, and then forgot about them. And also, the sad reality is most people don't spend enough time thinking about like security policies and access controls for a lot of these ad hoc workloads. So when you leave them out there for expanded period of time, and those workloads are just floating kind of in the kind of the void between the different spotlights, they do cause additional security risks. And one like very common mistake is obviously when somebody spins something up, it's very easy if that asset they just spun up is accessible from public internet and has ability to reach out to any
destination on the public internet, right? It's a human, you can say, nature that we want to make things easy for ourselves, but it's that kind of security policy where it's accepting traffic from public internet and has no egress restrictions at all is very dangerous and imposes a lot of risk, not only to that specific asset, but also to any other asset that asset is reachable to.
Yeah, I know really smart security people who've said, yeah, I know this isn't the proper way to do it, but I'm going to turn it off at the end of the week anyway. And it doesn't get turned off.
Yep.
Yeah. We're good at fooling ourselves that way. But no, I think that's a good topic or a good point to kind of wrap things up on. Is just the again, it comes back to that visibility, that situational awareness of what's actually running in your environment. And having good knowledge of that, and maybe putting some expiration dates on things. I really want to see that as an AWS feature. I'm sure you could do it as a tag, maybe. Put an expiration date on something. Yeah, I think that
but
that'd
it's
be
tricky
because
cool people will keep renewing it, right?
Yeah,
every 6 months
right.
you get an email like, "Do you really want this?" And you're like, "Hey, I already forgot what that asset is, so I'm going to reply, yes, I really want this." I personally know I'm liable to some of those behaviors as well.
Yeah, because they'll get 40 of them at once because they'll set them all up at once, and they won't have time to look through each one of the 40. So they'll just continue.
Yes,
You're right.
Yes.
Oh well. Edward, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. This was a really fun conversation.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right. Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/ExtraHop to learn more about spending more quality time with your cloud workloads and understanding them better. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.
Attacks can't be prevented, but they can be stopped. Modern cyber attackers have already made it inside your network, but you have the upper hand. Find and eradicate threats with ExtraHop network detection and response, and shut them out before real damage is done. Learn the advanced techniques attackers are using and how ExtraHop stops them with a live attack simulation. Register at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP.
Managing and protecting the world's grueling number of endpoints, enabling Tanium's customers to see, control, and protect every endpoint everywhere. Tanium's mission is to provide certainty in uncertain times with the industry's only converged endpoint management. Trusted by the U.S. military and the majority of the Fortune 100, Tanium helps manage and protect nearly 30 million endpoints. Tanium, the power of certainty. Visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover in one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review suggestions monthly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. And my guest suggestion inbox is empty, so feel free to fill it up. I've cleared out all my guest suggestions. All right. Now for the Enterprise Security Weekly news, you can go to securityweekly.com/ESW293 if you want to check out the stories that we're going to be talking about today. All right. So the first one here is Banco Santander and ForgePoint Capital have teamed up. I assume they raised a fund here. What was the amount? Altogether up to 300 million euro. Yeah, so it sounds like they've worked with ForgePoint quite a bit. So, yeah, I mean, the main reason I put this in here is clearly funding for cybersecurity hasn't been materially impacted, I don't think. I think I've heard from a few folks that there might be a bit more reticence in they might not be as loose with their willingness to fund certain companies. Maybe they're doing more due diligence, but certainly the money's still out there. So good to hear. And it's interesting. I guess it's just, this is Santander who put together the press release. I find it interesting that they're using euros here. I guess their headquarters is in Spain, so that makes sense. I guess they have a lot of headquarters, different places, but I think that's their main one.
Well, with the recent currency model, I mean, pretty much it's 1 to 1 to 1 dollar euro.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and pound as well.
Right. Which is crazy.
Well, if it stays there, it's going to be a lot more convenient to travel. And
I remember when I was a kid, it was like 1.5. Well, at the time it was Irish pounds, but euro to a dollar, and then the British pound sterling was basically 2 to a dollar. So yeah, I was over in Ireland recently, and it was basically 1 to 1. It was very easy to convert stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in Brazil a couple of weeks ago, and it's 5 reais to $1 US. So again, you just divide everything down there by 5. Very, very easy to do the math in your head. And speaking of euros, French-based Tetris. Love the name. It's kind of a weird spelling, but I imagine it is probably said Tetris. Probably pronounced Tetris. That can't be a mistake.
Let's go with Tetris. That sounds good.
Yeah. So this is a French XDR platform named Tetris, and this is I imagine this has got to be like a Series B, but I don't think they have those details here. No, it's a Series. This must be a Series B. Their Series A was 20 million euros in 2020, and over 260 people. So probably the biggest XDR vendor that I have never heard of.
Right.
And we actually looked at funding, I want to say maybe at the beginning of the year. We started to notice that we were seeing a lot of funding from outside the US. And I wonder if that's a trend. And it's one of those things where I can't tell if I'm just looking more closely now, or if it's a legitimate trend that we're seeing a lot more startups in Switzerland, in general, in Europe. The number of Israeli startups seem to have increased like 2 or 3-fold over previous years.
Yeah, I was going to say the startups out of Israel were just tremendous and huge for quite a while there.
So I might have to hunt down some actual data for that, because I don't know if it's just my personal bias. Just since I started doing the podcast, I started studying these things a lot more closely. But certainly we're seeing a lot of startups, with significant funding out of other countries. India also, we kind of regularly see a lot of stuff out of India as well.
Right.
Vanta, which has some very clever marketing. At RSA, they had something like your sock doesn't have to suck, or I forget how it's worded now. But very clever, because they're all about automating compliance, the evidence gathering that you need to do for a SOC. So they and it's not just SOC 2. There's a bunch of companies that do this kind of stuff, and just in general compliance stuff that's usually very spreadsheet heavy, very labor intensive, very manual labor intensive. Here it is: compliance that doesn't SOC too much. That was I'll paste that in the Discord. Yeah, I'll drop that in the Discord and in the Slack so everybody can see it. But they raised another $40 million, and as Tyler Shields was saying last week, we're seeing a lot of this where if somebody can't raise a new round, they're doing extensions. And this is yet another. I think this is the third extension that we've seen to an existing round. So this is a $40 million extension of its Series B.
Fundamentally, what's the difference between? Is it just a horse of a different color, or is there something actually fundamentally different about raising another round and calling it an extension versus another round? Because at the heart of it, money's money that you owe.
So Tyler would have the real definitive answer here, but I'll take a stab. I think one of the things is it's bad messaging to have a down round. You don't want a Series C that's smaller than your Series B. That could affect confidence in the company and its performance and its ability to raise funds. So the optics are better adding to an existing round than doing a new round that's smaller. And I imagine it's a whole lot less hassle and paperwork to add to an existing round than to start an entirely new round.
Sure, because you have the investors, you have the relationship, you have the history.
Yeah. You're adding to a term sheet instead of starting from scratch, I imagine, with the new round. But again, investors might be screaming at me that I got that all wrong. But I'm trying to use what I've learned from Tyler and Will Lin and other smart investors who understand this kind of stuff.
That's okay. If they're screaming at you, they can reach out. It would be good to have our listeners really understand that.
Do you have any guest suggestions that can suggest my bad take, or can help me with my bad takes? Drop them in our guest suggestion form. All right. So Vanta, and we don't have a ton of stories for news today, but that's fine for me. We've had some really big weeks for news. I think it's natural to see that kind of ebb and flow.
So I'm sort of interested in this Iron Vest biometric authentication, decentralized biometric password manager.
Sure. Yeah. Go for it.
So, it's interesting messaging. I don't know much about the company beyond the press release here and the website, but in terms of password managers, password vaults, we know that they're substantively better, right? So they are predicated still on passwords. We know that biometrics do help. There are problems with them as well, but passwordless biometric authentication, what makes this better? What makes it different? I guess it's the decentralization, right? It's the quote microsegmentation of passwords, similar to some of the other areas that network focused versus identity focused. So it's an interesting concept, but you really don't hear much about decentralized password management, because by default, a password manager is centralized, passwordless, or just centralized password management.
Yeah, I'm not seeing a whole lot here that looks that differentiates it from your 1Password, your LastPass, some of the others there, except they're also doing throwaway credit cards. So like, is it privacy.com? I think it's privacy.com, where they create virtual credit card numbers for you, and you can basically treat it like a gift card. You can put like, okay, this credit card number only has access to $100. So once it hits $100, that it's cut off. So it sounds like they're doing something like that, except they call them masked credit cards. But then, everything else sounds okay. They're also doing masked email addresses. So I guess throwaway credit cards, throwaway email addresses, so they're kind of combining two different types of apps here. Like I've seen privacy apps that just do like the throwaway stuff, to allow you to anonymize, your data that you use online, to avoid being tracked and things like that. So they also have a virtual phone number. And then combining that with a password database. But one other thing they mention here.
They call it multi-party computing. It's a decentralization method, I guess, similar to the idea of micro-sharding a little bit.
None of that makes sense to me. I mean, it's throwaway email addresses and credit cards and a virtual phone number that isn't tied to you. Like all that. Those are neat privacy products that are all kind of rolled into one. But I don't know what you mean when you say micro-sharding, though.
So when I was working as an analyst, we had a couple of companies that did micro-sharding. And the way it was explained to me was they would take your data and they would scatter pieces of it. Instead of communicating the data encrypted, they would scatter the pieces of data and encrypt the pieces of data, so that if somebody caught the data in transmission and somehow decrypted it, they couldn't get to all of it. It was like different pieces of a puzzle. It was sort of like Mike TV on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. How he goes through the TV and he's all scattered about and can't put them back together.
Sure. Like M-Event key control is like that, where you need at least 3 out of 7 people to be able to reassemble a key. So I am familiar with that. That's something you sometimes see in old enterprise controls.
Right. So it seems like maybe they're doing something somewhat similar with their concept of multi-party computing, not storing the data for your authentication in one place, but in multiple places.
Oh, really?
Taking out maybe that single point of failure. Maybe that's the concept here.
I didn't see anything about that. I mean,
it's on ironvest.com/security.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking at security, multi-party computing. Okay. Yeah, I mean, the other thing I was looking at is it looks like they provide some kind of overlay. I don't know if they're actually handling the authentication, but they're talking about adding biometrics to third-party websites that you use. And the only way I can imagine you do that is by becoming also an identity provider, using something like SAML to redirect authentication to theirs. So yeah, authentication beyond sign-in.
It's just an interesting topic to me because
I might have to try it out. They have a free. Yeah. Well, I think I have to go a little bit above the free plan to play with some of these, but yeah, I don't want to spend too long with people listening while we scan the website, but we'll talk about it again after we've had some time to play with it.
Yeah, it's just an interesting concept, I think.
Yeah, I mean, especially it's also interesting that they seem to be selling to both B2C and B2B, and we're seeing that more and more now. We're seeing like consumer products that are actually built and designed for consumers, but sold to businesses with the idea that businesses will or can use these as like an employment perk, like offering identity protection or something like that to all your employees is just, a perk like gym membership reimbursement or something like that. So that's a neat idea.
Well, I think I made a mention it a couple of weeks ago. It's the idea, the iPhone originally started as a consumer product, and then you started having people use it in their personal lives saying, wait a minute, my work phone isn't nearly this good. And employees were rallying for it, but as soon as executives got their hands on it and said, well, I'm just going to use this at my business, IT make it work. So that's how a lot of this started. So, backing into the enterprise, getting people familiar with it, especially if it's a person who's sort of a forward technology adopter. Hey, I've used this in my personal life. We don't have anything as good as this in my work environment. Bringing it in that way, it's a smart idea.
Well, especially since I think a lot of our experience with security awareness training and things like that at this point, we've clearly learned that it's unlikely somebody's going to be have bad habits at home, with their computing and their privacy and security habits, but then be amazing at work, right? So this idea that you can somehow separate people's personal digital life and habits and all that and security with their work life. Like we've seen so many breaches that have occurred, because somebody reused a password one place, at a non-work place that got compromised, and then also reused that password at work. And clearly there are points where the two worlds collide in a meaningful way. And I think it's interesting, on the market side to try and combine that to sell a consumer product that's also a business can buy for their employees.
Well, if you think about it, the whole, it started with the, completely remote work at the beginning of 2020. People's work lives are at home now. So they're a lot more likely to take it a lot more seriously when they know, hey, this is my stuff. Your personal stuff is usually more near and dear to your heart. It doesn't matter what your work's telling you. Your personal stuff is still your personal stuff for most people. And, the fact that people are working at home a lot more, that quite literally hits closer to home. And so people are more conscientious about it because they want to protect their personal stuff. They want to protect their kids. More and more of this data is coming into their homes. And so, it was a very, very, very unfortunate thing that happened at the beginning of 2020 and still lingering a little bit. But in terms of security awareness and good business practices and hygiene and all of that, I think it's made a positive impact for a lot of people.
Yeah. It's definitely not something we can ignore at this point. Sean, you've been quiet. Any news stories here that caught your attention?
Yeah, certainly the cyber M&A expected to remain robust in 2023 is pretty interesting. I think that this has been one of the challenges that we've seen, companies acquiring other companies and really being able to do their due diligence and understand what is the cybersecurity posture or the security posture of the systems of that company that they're acquiring. This makes a lot of sense. There's plenty of companies out there that grow through acquisitions or have identified that this is a niche they want to grow into or acquire a competitor, and they want to make sure that the security of the systems that they are acquiring, that they connect into their environment, are going to be appropriate. This makes a lot of sense to me, even given the economic conditions. The security of the systems, and when you interconnect these, and we see a lot of that with our customers, it remains important. It continues to be even more important, because the last thing a company wants to do is incorporate a new company and their technology systems, which tend to be the same things, Active Directory, et cetera, and then interconnect them, and all of a sudden attackers have a way in through this other company, this new acquisition. So I see that as being very strong, that there's definitely going to continue to be a need there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw somebody tweeting about it as if like this would be like a single event, like, oh, cybersecurity is going to consolidate, as if it's not something that's been constantly happening, over the past 30 years. And how do you get new security companies? You acquire companies. Once they're if they have to stay on for an extra year or two, they'll stay on, and then they'll take their equity and go start a new company. So it's just something that happens constantly. And acquisitions are often rough on customers. So I don't know. It's again, I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but I'm pretty sure the cybersecurity market, just the raw numbers of vendors in the market, is steadily growing. I don't see it shrinking or consolidating down anytime soon.
No, I think it's going to be pretty robust across the board. Companies acquiring other companies, and certainly building out their portfolio. I mean, we're in an industry of checkboxes, like it or not, and a lot of customers are comparing the checkboxes of this customer or this company and what their product is with another one, and making sure that they have what they need. I think that's why XDR is the new buzzword, right? Someone goes, "Hey, we have an XDR because it does this," and now all the others are like, "Okay, well, you have an EDR, but do you have an XDR?" And then people are scratching their heads about what that actually means and what capabilities really define an XDR, right?
Yeah, this is something I studied. This effect is something I studied a lot when I was at 451 Research. And I did some talks about it, where specifically I was following Endpoint. And Endpoint has some very clear market trends that you can follow, where Endpoint security has had two large consolidation events, and I mapped everything out, all the companies where, like in 2004, 2005, we had like 40, 50 cybersecurity vendors, and then it went down to like 20 or 30, by 2009. And already at that point, when it was shrinking down, it was already growing again, because AV was getting beat up. Was not doing a good job protecting against attacks. That was the age of go to the wrong website and suddenly you're compromised. Just all you have to do is visit the website, and this what they call them, kits, where they were creating custom unique malware on the server side and delivering that in real time. Like they would even determine your platform. Like, do we need to send the Windows 10 version or the Windows 7 version or the Windows XP version, and it was all parameter calls. And then I can't think of the term. And then the kit would generate that malware on the fly and deliver it just to you. It was special made just for you. And so then we saw Next Gen AV and SentinelOne and Cylance and CrowdStrike all popped up, and I followed that, and it's all consolidated back down again. there's probably still well over 100 endpoint security vendors out there, but it actually has consolidated quite a bit. And that first round, remember, if you wanted a firewall on your Windows or Mac Windows or Mac, you had to buy it. They actually sold it separately. That was a separate product you could spend money on, was just a firewall. And then all of a sudden it was, and then all of a sudden, well, Black Ice was more than just a firewall, though. It was an IPS as well, a host IPS. But all that got consolidated. If you wanted to encrypt your hard drive, that was a product you had to buy separately.
Right.
And then that got built into the OS. VPN, you had to buy a client VPN product. And then it got built into what eventually we called EPP, endpoint protection platforms, something like that. So, and cloud, I think is really where cloud and data, I think is where we're just going to see a lot of fragmentation and consolidation all happening at the same time.
Yeah, the biggest challenge that we've been seeing is certainly around the management story of devices, whether they're joined to on-prem or they're joined to cloud, and how to do that management across those different systems. So I think that's a big area of opportunity, and certainly the vendors that are able to capture that as well as have a good security story are going to be successful.
And so I mean one of the bigged ones, the most shocking, I've already forgotten the name of the private equity firm. I had never heard about it before this, but the same private equity firm acquired FireEye, RSA, McAfee. Like they owned like more than half of all the old school giant security companies, big security platform companies, and just carved them all up and spun them out. And we're starting to see that now. It looks like with Thoma Bravo picking up Ping and SailPoint in the same year. And aren't they? They're also the ones who picked up ForgeRock. So they just picked up.
SailPoint and Ping are pretty big. I mean, we see a number of customers using SailPoint for identity management, and then of course Ping for federation and identity. SailPoint for management of cloud systems, across cloud systems, and then Ping is managing the identity and handling the federation. So that's a good play there.
And then ForgeRock.
Right.
And ForgeRock that's more B2B2C. So like when you log into like Bank of America, I think they have the top 9 banks or something like that as customers. So, if you log into any large U.S. bank, you're logging in through ForgeRock, I think.
Yeah.
So
sounds right.
Yeah, each of them multi-billion-dollar purchases: $2.8 billion for Ping, $6.9 for SailPoint, and $2.3 for ForgeRock. Yeah. So yeah, it's crazy to see so many identity management vendors all under one PE, but I guess no less crazy than RSA, FireEye, and McAfee all going to the same PE.
Right.
Let's see here. What's next? So might as well mention this next here. So I wrote up my experiences. I went to Brazil for the first time, and what I was interested in, because my company put on kind of like a one-day invite-only CISO event. And so all the CISOs are just talking about their challenges, their experiences, and stuff like that. And I was really interested to see it because I haven't traveled a whole lot internationally outside Europe. I did go to Colombia, so I got kind of that feeling from South America on where people are at, and that was for a security conference. But certainly when I went to the Middle East 10 years ago, they were way behind in terms of tech and security maturity, and which is one of the reasons they were bringing in folks from the outside. That you could make a lot of money if you're willing to move to the Middle East and help them fix their security issues. Sure. But yeah, going to Brazil, going to Sao Paulo, it was identical to the conversations that I'm hearing here. So it was interesting seeing that, they're no further behind than anybody here in the U.S. from what I could tell from the conversations happening. And Sao Paulo is like a huge ton of startups there, a lot of tech there, a lot of banking there, finance. They have a lot of neobanks in Brazil. So I found it just really interesting to get that perspective. I don't often get non-U.S. perspective on how things are going. I get a little bit from Australia from listening to Risky Business, to that podcast, but otherwise I've got some gaps in my knowledge and perception of how security is going in other parts of the world.
It's definitely interesting for sure. I mean, while we all kind of deal with the same sort of challenges and issues, attack profiles, but there's definitely differences in size of businesses. Talking with folks over in Australia, talking with folks in Europe about different ages of company sizes, ages of companies, as well as their size, how they're distributed, how they manage these challenges. It's always fascinating for me.
Yeah. Oops. I closed my news window by mistake. Let's see what else.
I want to hear about this ghostwriting of tweets.
Yeah,
yes.
I couldn't get into that, so I don't have a subscription, so you'll have to.
Oh, sorry about that. I think I actually do have a subscription. I should have grabbed a copy of that and sent it over to you guys. But yeah, so there's a lot of this has been all over social. People saying, I know you can probably make a lot of money doing that, but that much, so a lot of people are very skeptical about this, about the truth to it. But some of the people who actually pay for these things, like there's been enough feedback at this point that I think this is pretty legit. A lot of folks want really good Twitter game, and they're willing to pay somebody else to help them, get to a certain level. And it's not like people are logging in directly to their accounts to do it. It's more like, I'll draft you a bunch of tweets and you choose which ones you use, which ones you don't. So it's more like ghostwriting in that case, where you do get some editorial control over what you send. It's not somebody just logging into your Twitter and pretending to be you.
Sure, you can even have federated access. I know when I've worked at a few companies, the executives have wanted the marketing team or the social media team to create and actually post the tweets. And so you can obviously have accounts, you pay for it, but you have different logins to those, and you can use services that will, like the buffers and
Owly and Buffer
of the world. Yeah,
and they have a whole editorial workflow built into them, right? Like you can just have somebody who can only create draft tweets, and then you can approve or decline them, which moves them into scheduling, and Buffer automatically does the scheduling for you. Yeah, so it's I mean, it's really interesting to hear that. Like, I can't imagine that being my whole job, though. Like, so what do you do for a living? Nice Ferrari. What do you do? I write tweets for rich people.
I mean, hey, if you can come up with compliance that doesn't sock, fun little things and
doesn't sock too much.
The equivalent of a jingle is for a company, you get paid to be creative. Why not? I mean, it's really small things. You're creating really, really small things. But
I mean, if you're even a month off your game, like that could be the difference between a tweet going viral because of a funny meme and just complete cringe fest. So somebody doing this, they really do have to kind of keep up with the trends and what's popular. And, if the goal is for the tweet to do really well in terms of, what's the metric? Number of times it's seen. Help me out here, Katie. What's that metric?
I don't know. There's a magic number of
impressions. Thank you. Impressions.
Oh, I had no idea where you were going with that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Thanks, Gus. Yeah, no, it was the I mean, because that's that's part of the contract, right? Like you hire PR firm or something like that. You know, you want a guarantee of like a certain number of mentions or something like that.
Yes. Yeah, I'm so far from that. I'm like, woohoo! One person read something I wrote, so mega impressions and whatever.
Yeah. So I've got a must read here. This with technology, there's no such thing as magic. It's for me, it's nothing really new, but what's interesting about it, it's kind of taking this idea, of how companies market themselves and, how innovation occurs and things like that. And, Keith here, who is actually the Keith Hoodlet was one of the original founders of the Application Security Weekly podcast. Him and Paul started that, and I think he was there for like the first 50 or so episodes of Application Security Weekly. His background is actually in, let me look it up real quick here, something about behavioral science. So this is all about biases, about different biases and how to spot them, when looking at the market. So really interesting read, and he breaks it up. The way he breaks it up is really nice, and kind of builds on some of the work that Haroon Meer and I did in the keynote called "The Products We Deserve," where we go into how the analyst industry works, how companies get seen, how they kind of increase their presence in the market. So really interesting read there if you want to understand kind of the vendor side of things, how the whole marketing side of vendor stuff works. And it's kind of funny because a lot of it's kind of attacking the approaches there, but at the same time, you could use this post, like this is just straight up success. Like if you just treat this whole post as instructional and you're in marketing for a vendor, it's gonna work. Like the process clearly works and it has been working for a while. So you could treat the whole thing as just instructive for anybody building a marketing program for a startup. All right. I think I'm going to jump to, is there anything I missed here that I wanted to talk about? I don't think so. So squirrel story. Let's hit the squirrel story here.
Oh, I'm again embarrassed for Massachusetts.
Yeah, I mean, other shows have even have segments just for Florida man. Now Massachusetts woman gets to put her
This
stamp.
is like the second or third time. There was the turkey thing a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
The attack turkeys.
Florida man has competition. So for
Massachusetts woman and her bees, those poor bees.
All right. Do you want to give kind of were you already familiar with this story, Katie?
I actually did see it. Yeah, I saw it before you posted the stories today. So apparently what happened earlier this month is some woman was threatened with eviction, and the deputies were deployed to her house. And as soon as they tried to get in touch with her and tried to get her to come out of the house, she released a swarm of bees. She had a hive, and she let the bees out, and they swarmed the deputies. And a
bunch of people got stung too.
Yeah, a bunch of people got stung. She was wearing protective gear. They had absolutely no warning that they were going to be swarmed and stung by bees. And, if somebody's allergic, they could die. That was a point made in this little news release here. She used bees to try to not be evicted from her house. So,
slight correction there. It wasn't her house. It was somebody else getting evicted.
I'm sorry. Yeah. You're right.
And she showed up to protest it. So apparently this is a pretty common thing, is people showing up to protest somebody getting evicted.
With bees.
Really?
Yeah. No, I didn't realize that this is a common thing, that like people, if somebody's being evicted, like the word goes out over Facebook or wherever they're coordinating, and they'll show up and like try and block the eviction from happening. And she just happened to have a ton of bees, and she was like,
she brought her hive of bees to this house.
Yeah. That was her hammer. That was the tool she had at her disposal, were bees.
And even if you're not allergic to bees, there are a lot of people who are scared stiff of bees.
Yeah. So a swarm of bees is generally pretty terrifying, especially when they're angry, which is what she made them angry on purpose.
Well, she was charged with assault and battery by means of a dangerous weapon, assault by means of a dangerous weapon, and disorderly conduct.
Yeah, 4 counts. So, and the deadly weapon was bees, to be clear.
I don't know what kind of charge that holds, but I could also see animal cruelty coming in there. I'm sure some Humane Society people might make that case too. You can't use you can. People do use live animals as attack mechanisms all the time, but it's not right.
I think once you unleash an animal or creature against another, knowing that they could cause some harm, potentially serious harm with bee allergies, then there's definitely going to be some charges around that.
Yeah, especially if you don't have any claim of self-defense, which clearly she didn't. She just rolled up on these cops, serving this eviction. And at
least in the picture, she's wearing protective gear.
Yeah. She just rolled up on these cops and just unleashed the bees. Smashing.
She knew that there was potential for some serious damage.
Oh yeah. Like there was a quote. I don't know if it's on this one, but somebody mentioned they were allergic, and she was like, "Oh, you're allergic? Good."
Florida man and Massachusetts woman are one of a kind. Well, they can't be one of a kind. That was a stupid thing to say. Never mind. Apparently it's late. I need to go to sleep.
Yeah, they're peas in a pod or something like that might work a little bit better there.
Or bees in a pod?
Bees in a hive? Yeah. Wow. So, weird stuff. Yeah, people.
On that note, but
some weird, wild stuff.
Yeah. People need to chill out, man. Need to chill out. All right. So that's all we've got for you today. If you stayed for the bees article, thank you. If you enjoyed any of what you heard today, you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Anywhere else that will take podcast reviews, we would appreciate that. Or if you just have a comment, anything like that, you can hit us up on Twitter. You can email us or hit us up on LinkedIn as well. So thanks so much, Sean and Katie, for joining me today. My script is all messed up. It says Tyler and Katie. I had to really kind of adjust on the fly today. But thanks to both
of you. It's that kind of day. That kind of day.
Yep.
Thank you.
Appreciate you guys helping out today. And a big thanks to everyone watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. We will be back next week, and Matt Alderman will be sitting in for me next week. I'll actually be on vacation early next week, but later in the week, I am delivering the keynote at LasCon in Austin, Texas. So if you are in Austin, Texas, and you're going to LasCon, please say hello. And love to meet anybody who listens to the podcast in real life. But I'll see you 2 weeks from now. Thanks.